Welcome back. With a mission to support organizations that provide nutritious food to children and families in need, the U.S. Department of Agriculture is offering nearly $2 billion in additional funding to food banks and school meal programs. Joining me to discuss what this means for thousands of families across the country is Vice President of the New York School Nutrition Association, Naim Walcott. Naim, thank you so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you
Now,
for having me.
yes, of course. Now, can you tell me a little bit more about the Department of Agriculture's effort to support, families in need?
Yeah, sure. So the Department of Agriculture is uh, essentially adding $2 billion in funds. And the Department of Agriculture is depositing $2 billion in funds to help um, food insecurity issues in the country. Of that 2 billion, 1.5 billion is going to local food banks, and then the other 500 million is going to be going into helping school districts procure food to offset some of the supply chain issues and higher price wages for procuring food right now for schools.
Now, the last time that we spoke, we talked about, how federal school lunch funding was at risk. Do you think this is at all related to that, or, could that have possibly influenced this decision?
I'd like to think so. I'd like to think so. I think every bit helps at this stage of the game. As you know, the universal meals at no charge has ended because of the emergency environment that we were existing in with the pandemic and COVID. Um, so that urgency, sorry, it's my school bell. That urgency kind of dying down and subsiding a bit has not changed though on the front end for families. And so I'd like to think that part of the thinking to bring money into helping get food into neighborhoods and families and school districts um, is to help alleviate some of that residual effect that we're still seeing and that we're still experiencing.
Now, can you just explain, how this is going to help some of these families tremendously? Just why it's so crucial that, this funding is going to school meal programs?
Absolutely. So, as you know, if you're going into any supermarket right now, you are seeing sticker shock, right? So, some of the estimates range from 9% to almost 11% in inflation just on food costs alone. And that primarily is being hit uh, by working families. They're the ones that are feeling the pinch there in the greatest ways. But also for your local food service programs, as these are programs that we can't charge exorbitant amounts to feed our children. This money is going to help us make sure that our programs are uh, staying fiscally sound in order to carry out the mission of feeding kids in the communities.
Now, this effort will also support food banks. While I was reporting during the pandemic, I noticed that food banks have become a much needed resource, and the demand was extremely high. Can you explain why we were seeing that? And do you think we're still seeing that 2 years after?
Um, yeah, I mean, right now, I mean, it's an interesting thing. So when you're looking at some of the stats, I was looking at USDA.gov. Um, you're seeing that our unemployment is low. We're at our unemployment numbers are looking good. Um, but the demand and the need in food banks is raising. It has risen. It's gone up significantly. And across the board, food banks are citing greater need from everything from manpower, but also greater need from their communities, the people that they are giving food out to. There's a huge need for that. And I think a large part of that is inflation. Um, we just got through kind of the gas price thing, and great gas prices have come down to a certain degree, but food prices are still high. And it's important to note that when you're talking about this as it pertains to school nutrition, you're talking about feeding children, you're talking about feeding kids, um, and these are parents trying to feed their children.
Now, we talk about it a lot on the show, but for those who don't know, can you just explain what food insecurity is?
Sure. So, food insecurity essentially is the inability of a family to procure or buy or purchase or provide healthy, nutritious food to their families. And we know food insecurity doesn't necessarily mean that a family might be permanently in a bad spot, but it could be the transition from one job to the next. It could also be, and what we're seeing, I think, more, which I think is more of the case right now, is that higher food prices across the area from the Bronx all the way to the east and the Long Island are impacting families in a very large way. Um, I believe the stats on that are somewhere between 9 and 11% right now. Um, and so, yeah, that creates food insecurity. And to the question we were talking about earlier, as far as how does that look when you're dealing with a food bank? Well, food banks traditionally are not usually dealing out in fresh produce, fresh vegetables, um, uh, poultry. They're dealing with more canned goods, dry goods. Not to say that they don't have those things, but traditionally they're more shelf-stable items. So this area and this understanding that families are relying on food banks. It's great that we are getting more of this food to the food banks in order to help families out. But then at the same time, there is a bit of a gap that we're seeing as well because there's other aspects of a child's diet and a family's diet that need to be provided for as well. And financial insecurity is a big limit to getting those things.
I'm really glad that you brought that up because I never thought of it before that, a lot of these food banks do give you food that you have to prepare, but not everyone may have access or, readily available a stove or fridge to store these items. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. Can you just talk about how this overall effort will just be useful in combating this?
Yeah, so the food bank part, great. That's something that I think our communities, and especially communities that with higher percentage of people that are food insecure, can benefit from is a wonderful, wonderful thing. Um, at the same time, your local school nutrition um, program in your schools is probably your gold standard for feeding kids. So when we talk about that 500 million that's going to be going to help schools in this particular endeavor, that's more than invaluable because um, your child now is going to be getting at least, at the very, very least, 2 complete meals with uh, dairy, protein, vegetables, fruits, whole grains. These are things that are vital and necessary for a child to grow and learn and do well in school. So if we can help out with 2 of the 3 big meals of the day, that's a step in the right direction.
Now, I really want to know this is a great initiative, and it's going to help so many families. But, what are some long term solutions towards ending, food hunger or food insecurity? And please feel free to tell me if that's a loaded question because there's so many parts to it. But I'm just curious to know what are some long term solutions?
Long-term solutions. Well, I mean, there's a lot of different things that can go on into that question. So yeah, so it's broad, but some ideas. We have to reinvest more in our local communities and local farms. That's a big thing. Getting more of a local agricultural lifestyle or community centered food production. I don't know. We have to make food center plate in our communities. It's got to have more of a place than just the supermarket because what we're seeing now is sticker shock, and there aren't relationships with the supermarket other than just paying. But if we can get more of local farmers, local produce, local meats, those are things that I think would help some of this. Um, on a more stable end, and in the immediate, I think the other gold standard is universal meals for students at no charge. We were feeding more kids throughout the pandemic than ever before. Um, so you have to ask yourself the question on how you think about the community. Are people taking advantage of it, or are people saying, you know what, this is a need that now the school is providing for my child, that I can now invest my resources in other areas for my community, for my family, etc. The immediate gold standard is allowing children not to have to deal with money at the cash register and come to school, get a good healthy breakfast, good healthy lunch. In some cases, there are supper programs and snack programs. Um, that's your immediate gold standard. But across the board, we have to we have to get food to be more locally produced in ways in more communities that make it more accessible, and especially the healthier stuff. You know, the canned foods and processed foods. You realize that there's a lot of uh, there's lost knowledge when it comes to that. When we're talking about preparing meals,
Right.
there's a lot of people that don't know how to do that anymore.
Right. Now, can you just let everybody know how they can stay up to date with your organization?
Oh, absolutely. You can go to the New York State School Nutrition website. You can also find us and follow us on social media. You can get involved in the National School Nutrition Association as well. Currently, we have everything from podcasts. We have a newsletter called Fresh Bites that you can subscribe to hear about what's going on in November of this month. I'm sorry, October of this month. We'll be up in Verona, New York for our annual state conference. So there are tons of ways to connect, but your best, go to the hub, the New York State School Nutrition Association, and you'll find links to just about everything that we're doing, as well as the discussion points of things that are going on, action points, writing your local legislators about, making your voice heard and what your concerns are. So
All right.
that would be my plug.
All right. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday.